Well, I hope you all enjoyed that. It's quite thought-provoking and very different from what most of the fashion industry, I think of as where their fibres have come from. So, if we go back to our panelists again, having seen the film, there's a question that I'd like to ask them. It's, what do you feel the true value of natural fibre is, and what will it take farmers and consumers to recognise this? Who wants to go through? Andy?
That's a very challenging question. I think the true value is, as individuals, we need to initially stand up and reject anything synthetic. And then the true value of natural fibres would be more apparent, because the majority of the population probably wouldn't have many clothes on. Which would then make it very, okay, I need to work with someone who's producing a fibre. And then you understand that the shepherd, just one, the wool fibre, because that's the one I know a little bit about, that shepherd who looks after the sheep all the year, aims all the time to keep them healthy. He's not successful all the time. There is a mortality rate, there is with humans. Then you have a shearer, and it takes about 10,000 sheep to become a relatively good shearer. That is torture on the way through. Then you can possibly travel the world shearing sheep. But then you want somebody who's going to take care of that wool. So you need a wool hand, because the shearer wants to just shear sheep. It's addictive, it's a passion, and you can travel around the world just 12 months a year shearing sheep, which I've done, and it is awesome. You're out in sticks, you can land in the town, you might have a beer in town, and move on quick before you get in trouble. And I would say it'd be the same for your natural cotton growers, your flax growers. It's all year round you're doing, nurturing that product so that then it can be processed into a fabric, into a material that other people can wear. And until we're conscious of what it takes to produce that, true value will be ignored, really, because we've got that ability to not worry about it. But probably also there should be a little bit more consciousness of what happens when you've finished with that pair of socks, that shirt, that hat, whatever, where the rest of his life, because we're all stuck in that kind of right away. Someone else's issue, don't worry about that. Don't know if that answers it, but
it does.
A little bit of the feeling behind it.
Thank you, Andy. Emma, well, Ida is still being an angel. Do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think it's a good opportunity to share, I guess, one of the core concepts behind Fibreshed, which is kind of the underpinning Fibreshed as an organisation is this soil-to-soil model for producing clothing, which essentially means that a garment produced according to the Fibreshed ethos is grown naturally, it's knit or woven into fabric, which is then manufactured into clothing, and that clothing ultimately at the end of its life cycle being 100% natural, biodegradable, can literally just go on a compost heap. If it goes into landfill, it's not going to contribute to more landfill, ultimately it's going to decompose. But it could go on a compost heap and nourish the next generation of soil, microbial, fungal activity going on there that can then nourish the next generation of dye plants or fibre animals that are grazing on that pasture. So it's a very neat kind of model. It's nature's answer really to circular economy, but without needing any kind of intensive chemical, mechanical energy inputs to do any kind of fancy recapturing of materials and turning them into something else. It's exceedingly simple, just using nature's own processes. And if that element of the natural fibre industry could be considered against what's going on with the production of synthetic fibres and garments, I think suddenly, kind of Andy referred to, there'd be a very clear imbalance again. And that might be starting to happen with the kind of environmental regulations and policies that are coming into place. The EU, for example, is wanting to further reduce or even prohibit any more textiles in the landfill, but big push on incentivising more use of natural fibres. But yeah, it's when you compare the use of natural fibres, what happens to them at the end of their life cycle, the fact that they kind of go back to earth, it's that simple, rather than contribute to plastic microfibre residue that ends up everywhere. Surely the value will be more widely acknowledged again.
Thank you, Emma. Phoebe, would you like to add?
Yeah, I think following on from both those points, like our experience was also just like what Andy was describing, like all the different stages in producing a fibre. It's not like food, like you don't just pick an apple. It's like there are and then it's in the shop. There are so many processes involved and people and skill that is like makes this product like really valuable. And then like when you go back right to the beginning and like it's like what is that product actually doing as well? Like what is that sheep doing to the land? It's creating, like it's sequestering carbon. It's like actually benefiting us when we're in a climate crisis, like the way Andy grazes and other farmers working on rotational grazing and creating more biodiversity. It's like we're actually we're sequestering carbon, we're helping, like, I don't know whether I can say reverse climate change, but stop it, like, you know, going like at the rate it is. And it's just like clothes are cheap because someone's losing out, because the planet's losing out, and we're hearing reports like the last couple of days so much on like how we need to reduce like fossil fuels by 95%, and that needs to happen. And there's like, and yet we're producing clothes from this that we just chuck in the ground, and then we expect that that's fine, and we're encouraged to just buy more and more because it's cheap. It's not cheap. It's cheap because someone's paying the price who is being paid very little overseas in a completely different economy that is then losing out, and their land is losing out. And it's, I think, understanding and working with people in the UK as well, and just seeing how much skill there is to celebrate, and wanting to pay people like the right price, like pay people a like fair wage in the UK. Like Andy, I've worked with anyone who works so hard, and same with other farms. It's like farmers work exceptionally hard. They're incredibly skilled, as are the spinners, the weavers, like, and they need to be paid. Often they're still in the UK being paid like minimum wage, like possibly living wage, but it's like it needs to be more. We need to be like, there's a huge amount, I have a huge amount of respect for everyone in that supply chain. I want to be able to like really celebrate it. And then the cost is, it is what it is, and if people connect to that, like the benefits of it and of producing in that way for the like land, but also the skill involved, you suddenly go, oh wow, this is incredibly valuable and worth like putting our like money where our passions are and reconnecting. And I think I could go on, but maybe we should be good.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we can all take home from that is that the value is there, but it's so underappreciated at the moment, and the hard work and the skills are hugely forgotten, I think, really. People just don't think about it, which really brings us very nicely on to the next question, is what do you see and think are the hurdles? Phoebe's bubbling up already, everyone's bubbling up. The main hurdles that we have to overcome in the UK fibre industry. What are we missing? Who wants to take this one first? Phoebe, are you still on a roll?
I think there's lots of hurdles, but a lot of it comes down to education. Like you said, like that connection of like people actually knowing about all these different elements it takes, like actually like what a shearer gets paid and then what a spinner gets paid and the wool handler and all these things, that people are just really disconnected. We're starting to become, and like Em said, people are starting to become more connected to food, but we haven't, and we are with fibres, I think we are, but there's still a really way to go. And I think the other hurdles, which is different to maybe like what we've seen with our work in India and things, is like having those, the industry is still here, there is still that industry, the wool industry is still like functioning and, you know, it's all reinvigorating, but it's still very like potentially quite small scale. You either go like, well, for example, with us working with flax, we've gone to a hand spinner. We're not going to be able to create a like mainstream garment working with a hand spinner in Stroud. That's not going to, you know, the industry is not necessarily there. He's an amazing inventor creating like medium scale machines, and other people are too, that are like, but we lost these actual kind of larger scale machines. They all left, they went overseas, and we don't have them, and it would cost a lot to get those machines back and rebuild them, and it requires, I think, real, like, the government and legislation to be putting money, and boards and all sorts, to be putting money into reinvigorating those industries and saying this is really important. We've got the fibres here, we don't need to be going overseas, but we need it can all happen here, and it can create more jobs and it can create more connections. But I think that, yeah, that's one of the big ones, and that we've just got so out of the loop of connection and wanting things really fast and not necessarily feeling so, like when you feel connected to something, you're proud of it, and then you mend it, and then you keep it going, like Andy's jacket's 40 years old or something, and he's like proud to, you know, and I wear clothes of my mum's from 30 years ago, and you celebrate it. But we've kind of, yeah, we've lost that a bit, but I think it can come back. I think it can come back if we're talking in schools and like getting people to connect to the land more, and even in lockdown we saw that like people were kind of homing in a bit more on like what was potentially in front of them and what they could grow. But I think it's still a challenge. It's not like we're completely there and that we're like, okay, brilliant, these industries have been reinvigorated. I think there's still a lot of work to be done to really get there.
Thank you. Yes, I think so too. Emma, I know that you've done a huge lot of work just before you had Ida on looking at the synthesis map.
She came spots on time and I thought I was a week.
Looking at where those gaps were and sort of trying to look at how we connect it. So please take on from there, because if you feel like it.
Yes, at the same time as we received a bit of funding to make a film, and we also received some funding to do a piece of research which essentially is mapping the infrastructure that still exists in the UK for processing natural fibres. And our motivation there is to understand kind of if we as a Fibreshed, we network and connect with lots of fibre farmers, many of whom work with flocks much smaller than Fernhill. They are by far the biggest with 2,000 ewes. I'd say most have maybe 30 to 200. And we wanted to understand if those farmers are farming for fibre and putting effort into making quality fibre, what are their options for then adding value to that fibre in terms of getting it processed. And so we did this piece of research to map what facilities are out there for cleaning, spinning, weaving, knitting those fibres from the UK, which is a piece of research we've nearly finished, and it will be open source and available kind of publicly once we've done it. But essentially we found that of the X number of facilities in the UK that process natural fibres, maybe only 10% would be accessible to the average fibre farmer in terms of the volumes of fibre that they process at one time. One of the other questions that we were asking the facilities as we called round was, do you have any official traineeship or apprenticeship program within your facility, like how is your knowledge being passed on? And I'd say maybe 90% haven't done the calculations yet, the statistics, but about 90% of them said no. We don't have the time, the resources, we wouldn't pass health and safety, so we can't have apprentices. And of those, especially those that I've met personally, there's a fair few that are kind of within 5 to 10 years of retiring, if not doing the processing as their retirement project. In the kind of, those are in the smaller scale facilities that most private farmers would be able to work with. So we're also kind of coming towards what is potentially a huge lack of expertise and knowledge if something isn't done relatively quickly. Yeah, I mean, there are many more obstacles, but I'd say that's the one that's kind of been glaring at me recently, and I know Andy will have others.
Yeah, Andy, if you'd like to follow on from that, because I know that, by using your wool and having more things, it's something that you've done a lot of looking into.
We have looked into it time and time again. Initially, there was a program on telly, we're talking 30 years ago, called The Clothes Show. I don't know if that fellow called Jeff Banks. Through a mill in South Wales, we ended up having a jumper go to the clothes show, hoping to show up in London. I went along, and a Hessian bag of wool, 3 balls of wool in it. I actually met Jeff Banks and we were chatting, and he goes, "You're a shepherd, so why are you up here?" I go, "Well, people wear clothes produced from fibres." And it was basically again, back to that word disconnection, is just like, couldn't see why the relevance of having a shepherd meeting someone who runs that, not me, he ran the show. And you're thinking, I came away totally disillusioned. The jumper had amazing reviews. Someone took it to the prep show in America and they said, "Oh, we want 10,000 of those." Did a little sums on the calculator and thought, "God, I'm going to be rich." And then just thought, I can actually do that. I've only got, like, at the time we had about 500 units. It's just like, oh. So I had to overcome that in my own mind. But all the time it's driven me since then. It's like, well, don't lose faith in the product you're producing. We've kind of kept breeds of sheep that produce not only really good quality meat, but they produce good quality wool. And through studying that on the side of just trying to be a shepherd, I think the biggest thing that we need to do is, as individuals, but also lobby people at the top, but as individuals, set your own standard. I met the CEO of the Wool Marketing Board, and I just found it a natural thing to walk up to him, grab his tie, and go, "It feels like polyester, actually." And it was just like, "What are you doing? You're head of the Wool Board, and you've got something synthetic on." So we've all got to look at ourselves, number one, and if you don't, get your mate to look at you and go, "What am I doing wrong?" We've got to push harder that the synthetics, the abuse of planet Earth stops, which stops your oil, which stops your synthetic fibre. We've got to look at how, as we said, if it's natural, it will regenerate. If you don't want it, chop it up in little pieces so microbes can get to it and regenerate the next generation. It's not about just sustainability, keeping things the same. We've got to make it better because we've gone a long way backwards. If we sit on that sustainable line, well, we're just at the bottom of the pit, aren't we? We've got to get back up in the sunshine again. So it's got to be from us, but it's also got to be from top to bottom. We've got to all kind of lobby and have a go at people. And try and do it with a smile on your face and a little bit of cheekiness, because that's probably better than getting abusive.
Thank you, Andy. I know that we're overrunning hugely, so I'm going to ask if people would rather have some questions to our panellists, because we have got lots of more questions I can ask them, but I feel that it might be better if you want to ask some things, so that we don't go into 6 o'clock and we're still here sort of chatting around. Does everyone agree with that? would everyone like it to sort of open the floor? Yeah? Who has any questions? If you put your hands up and then I will. Yes?
I want to know. Sorry, the question I asked earlier. So you showed this at the beginning of Fashion Week. Where did you show it? Who did you show it to? What was the response?
So there was a, she asked me for the names of institutions, which were great.
Yeah, don't worry too much.
So there's an innovation showcase, essentially, that was run by a kind of knowledge and learning hub, which had its own name, and that's what I can't remember right now. And they picked brands and businesses, organisations, initiatives that are pioneering in different elements of fashion. So we are apparently, I find it quite amusing that this is pioneering in the kind of arena of sourcing and supply chain. I think there's nothing, to us pioneering about it at all. It's kind of what was always done, sourcing things locally, working with local staff and things and people. And it's what should have been happening all along. We just kind of got distracted along the way by fossil fuels and synthetic fibres and synthetic dyes. So, I mean, we all had a bit of a chuckle about the fact that we are pioneers and but that's what happened. So it was shown as part of that showcase at the beginning of London Fashion Week, which was all online. So we didn't have a kind of a great big cinema in front of a fancy catwalk. It was kind of a virtual event this year.
Did you get some feedback from it?
We got, so I work with the South West England Fibreshed, and I'd say we interface primarily with fibre farmers, being that much more rural. But I work very closely with my colleague in the South East England Fibreshed, who is much more designer, London facing, and the film as kind of part of that has generated a huge amount of interest from designers now and brands, and some quite well-known brands wanting to be able to source their fibres within the UK.
Right. Anyone else want to ask a question? Yes, sorry.
This is to Andy. So, don't the Wool Board pretty much run a monopoly on what's on wool in the UK? So, if you could change that, what would you think?
I still feel they have a vital role within the wool industry because a lot of things are set up. They're possibly a little bit top heavy on management, but a lot of business, I think, are like that anyway. It needs a lot more positive energy from farmers themselves, the wool producers, to be more directive on what they want the Wool Board to achieve for them. It is a very diverse business, actually, wool production. As on the film, there's over 60 different breeds in the UK, and the range of wool is from over 100 micron on fibres, Scotch blackface living up in the hills, to your finer wool breeds like your Shetland and your down breeds, which can be under kind of or around the 20 micron. So it's very diverse, but if you know how best to align all those products or all those wool types with the product, there's less of an issue. The British wool have been focused 40 odd years, I would say, on producing wool for the carpet industry. It's been a very easy trade. And we all get a bit slack when we find an easy outlet for what we're trying to do. Is, oh, we'll do that again, take our cut, do that again, take our cut. I may just have a brief view of what I think is going on there, but there seems to be a lot of people with the same opinion. For our little bit, Fernhill Farm, next weekend we're having an open day on the farm, and we're trying to demonstrate what can happen with wool and how wool gets into garments. And the following weekend up in London, I'm going blade shearing in the middle of London somewhere. I'm sure someone will send me a postcode. I'll meet some sheep in a trailer. I think it's the day they run the sheep across London Bridge. So we're taking it to town. People will hear what normal thing I say to people is, what have you got on? That don't look natural. And you get into a conversation.
Thank you.
And hope
No,
that
well-
answers.
Yeah, so I'm a hand spinner, and I always spin on British wool board. It's just like, oh, this is wool, all wool is equal. It's all the same. You know, we're just whacking it all together. That's very much the perception they always give.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you give to the public. And then the public say, oh, it's itchy, or you're using the wrong wool for the wrong purpose. So it's just...
So you possibly follow the line where I'm taking it's easy to sell a wool as carpet wool. Yeah. Come out to Fernhill Farm. You're most welcome. Well, you're all most welcome next weekend at Fernhill Farm on Bendits.
Yes.
I was really interested with the parallel with food, and I was just wondering, given that there's this kind of like buy local, buy organic type, what would you say to somebody who, like me, I'm not a brand, but I love making things out of wool and just get to know the fibre. How do you start doing that? Buy local, knowing exactly where your wool comes from at those scales. Is it possible, or do you only sell in huge amounts to fashion brands?
So on our website, we have a producer map.
Cool.
And that's something that we're slowly adding to as we find people. COVID kind of slowed down our outreach a little bit. But we must have mapped, I think, over 30 producers on there now. Not just producers, so it does include private farmers, also small brands who work with those farmers, and processing facilities and mills that we have in the South West. We are lucky to have 4, soon to be 5, that work on a very small scale. But many of those producers will sell direct to customer, either raw fleece if you're into hand spinning, or yarns that they've already had spun that are then suitable for knitting and weaving. As that is a good place to start. There are other directories. Woolsack is quite an exhaustive, not completely exhaustive, but a pretty thorough directory as well. Yeah, speaking of farms, if you can work with raw fleece, there's a lot of farms out there who would happily give it to you for free. Just because they don't have the time, the energy to kind of turn it into a product, all the money to turn it into a product that somebody could want, and they don't have maybe the sales channels to be getting rid of it raw.
And it seems like there is a big market. I mean, I started knitting with Woolen Gang, I'll give them £150 because I'm like, oh, I want to make this jumper, and I'm just thinking, I have to make it now. But it feels like there's a real energy for that sort of people making their own things, like with food. It's like, why don't we have a making master chef for the fibres?
I think it's coming. I think there's a lot of movement at the moment, and I think that, with our panelists as well, they all have a huge amount of knowledge. I mean, we've only just tickled the surface today. There's just so much more that is going on, and I think that, if you go to Fernhill Farm, Jen does amazing wool ready for spinning. She knows how to grade it. The Wool Marketing Board are beginning to look at wool in a different way as well. They are now trying to put it into type, and they are acknowledging our native breeds. But it's the quantities, they're not able to give you the small quantities. But again, there was a brilliant wool directory, but that's no longer in existence because I think the funding ran out. But if you go to even farmers' cooperatives, like Mole Valley and places like that, and put an advert in there, I'm interested in hand spinning. As Emma said, there are loads of people that would then come and say, you would probably have to do some work to it, because again, as Andy was saying, people have lost respect, farmers have lost respect for their wool because it doesn't bring them in anything. And as again Andy was saying, the stresses that happen to the youth throughout her life, she gets a wool break when she's lambing. If she's older, she can get cotted wool, which means it felts down right down at the roots, which is then more difficult to shear. But if you can keep those animals, and it's all down to your soils and how you look after those animals, if you can keep them healthy, the fleeces actually respond in a way that make it a lot easier. you know, you should be looking at flax, these wonderful people in Stroud at Flaxland who could go there and have a look at their thing because they can, you know, and hemp is the other one. So there's huge movement of people doing things and artisans and makers requesting those different things as well. So I think it's just funneling into places like this, asking questions the whole time. I think we're all on a huge learning curve. We don't know how to do it to make the world different. We're learning as well. But I think if all of us get there and start to ask the questions, you know, there will be more response from those markets because people will be saying, oh, they actually said, where did this all come from? Who made my shoes? I mean, you know, I've just got interested in leather through Fibreshed and the people that, you know, most people don't class leather as a fibre, but it is. And it's way behind all the more acknowledged fibres. You know, the tanning process, again, when I was looking back along and tanning my own hides, I was talking, you know, well, you have to send it to the continent because no one's going to look at a couple of hides here. I said, but why? So, you know, it's all those, I think that you'll come up with that. It's really difficult, the tanning industry, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's so far behind. So yeah, and it is just asking those questions. So looking at, I was at the Buggy Craft Fair yesterday, and there was a shoemaker there, and I was saying, do you know where your leather comes from? And they said, well, yeah, somewhere on the continent, we think. So again, there was this lack, and I said, but are you using anywhere in the UK? You know, so, and then they sort of look at you a bit peculiarly, you know, it's just quite interesting, you know, when you start to ask those questions, how much you can learn. And then again, manufacturers, when those questions become much more normal, when all the people that were buying things from Primark start to ask, that is when industry is going to change. So it's getting that message out there, not to people like us who are all really interested. It's to the bigger world, you know, how do we engage with them? How do we make them want to do things in a different way? I think that's one of the biggest questions we need to ask.
I think following on from your connection to making and things as well, I think as you say, as you started making, you then get another appreciation for an end product, and then you're like, oh, where does that beginning fibre come from? And I think that's why we created the slip kit, was to make that accessible so that people could connect to this bit of wool, this bit of flax, this bit of leather, and connect to the farmers and all the producers, and then make it themselves and be like, wow, that took me 2 days and that required lots of skill and I've learned lots, and then you have a new respect for the makers, the shoemakers and all the farmers and producers, because you're like, wow, this is vast, and also there's, you know, and then if you wanted to make more, you can go to Fernhill and buy more felt and, you know, all these things, and then go directly to those farms who are producing the beginning product, and then an end fibre for people to encourage making and connection, because I think that's it, when you touch it and when it becomes tangible, that it's wow, this is and how different all the materials are, and you can kind of grow with respect. But yeah, I think there is a maker revolution happening, definitely.
Do we need to wrap it up? I think we probably do. Yes. I know there's masses more we could say, but first, thank you all thank our panellists too, because they've been fantastic. And thanks Emma and Hattie for making the film.